This is the Nielsen Norman Group UX podcast. I'm Therese Fessenden, and we're back with another episode about AI and UX. AI hype has been rampant, but there are still so many open questions about it, like how will AI impact our work? What can UX professionals do to avoid being replaced by bots? Is that something that bots are even currently capable of? Today, we feature excerpts from two conversations that I've had about the latest developments in AI tools for UX research and analysis. We dissect the hype from the legitimate risks, costs, and benefits of AI. After all, AI dates all the way back to the 50s, so why are we suddenly hearing so much more about it in recent years? To answer that, we'll first hear from Savina Hawkins, a senior UX researcher at Meta and the co-founder of an AI platform known as Altis, which we'll soon talk about. She shares a bit about what developments have made AI today different from AI of the past.
Before now, AI has very much been confined to narrow use cases. So it was called narrow AI, and it'd be good at really, really niche things. So like image recognition, labeling things, facial detection, very sort of like small constrained tasks, but not a lot of broad sort of use of language or, reasoning and things like that. When there was reasoning, it was way back when we had expert systems. So these were mostly sort of logic designed sort of structured systems that, didn't adapt well to new contexts. And if you had something like a fluke of a car that's trained on tons of data to drive in the States, but is brought to the UK and doesn't really know how to handle adapting to driving on the other side of the road. Just a good example of what AI used to be in the past. More recently, we had this incredible breakthrough in model architecture called the transformer architecture, which I highly recommend getting nerdy about. It is such a interesting innovation, but this has unlocked so much in terms of specifically natural language processing, which before now was pretty limited, very naive, didn't have sort of a grasp of the, details and nuances in human communication, especially with things like two people talking. There's so many layers of meaning there. The AI would never have been able to sort of understand how that process works and understand it the way that a human would understand it. But with these new technologies, we're really seeing just the amount of understanding that the AI is capable of simulating, so to speak, because, what it really is understanding, right? But the amount that it's able to sort of analyze and distill and understand in human interaction, human use of language, it is, way more than it has ever been at any point in time with AI's history. So this is, of course, really exciting because this means now AI can, write creatively, it can generate content really fast, it can analyze things really thoroughly, which is stuff that it really couldn't do before. But, people who were trying to do it were being called crazy maybe up until like a year or two ago. So it's really interesting to see those breakthroughs. And in particular, these breakthroughs really are close to home for our work because so much of what we do is talking to people, understanding people's needs. And so much of humanity, all we're doing really is discourse, which is all, really grounded in language and, non-verbal communication as well. This transformer architecture has ramifications also for other types of models. So vision-based models, all of that stuff, the encoders and decoders and how those kind of like the inside of the model architecture and how that works. There's some really cool projects being done. So for example, Google came out with a model that actually is specifically engineered to understand UI design. So it can take in, a screen and basically understand where all the buttons are and you understand sort of what's being laid out information-wise in the way that a human would be able to understand it if they were looking at that interface. And that's stuff that was not at all possible until the last year. So you can see how these specific innovations around natural language processing, about multimodal AI, screen understanding, all of this is so applicable specifically to our field and is very much going to revolutionize the way that we do our work.
Oh, totally. And that's so fascinating to think, even within the year, that there has been some of this pretty incredible progress in the model's capabilities, in visual processing, in language processing. And I think that's amazing when you think about how professionals like us, UX professionals like us, can ultimately get work done. Now, I guess the flip side, we know a lot of what is possible. What would you say is maybe a particular thing that people should be a bit cautious about doing? Like, or is there a particular capability that isn't quite there yet that maybe needs just a little bit more time or some other input to make it ultimately better for our uses, like in the case of UX research or even UX design?
Yeah, I would say it's when humans are solving problems, we use so many layers of our own intelligence to be able to make sure that we're doing something correctly. So, for example, when you're working on a project, you'll often approach it from partially a business lens, partially a design, humanistic lens, and then maybe also social impact and broader, kind of concerns about how technology impacts the world that we all live in and share together. AI doesn't necessarily have all of those layers just yet. So it's very important for you to kind of view the tools that you're working with as thought partners, but more as sort of junior thought partners that maybe report to you, that you really need to be in charge of, making sure the quality is there, fact checking and making sure that the output actually makes sense and not just sort of accepting what it's saying at a really high level surface level. One example is hallucinations. Everyone's heard of them at this point. I'm not a fan of that language around it just because it implies that something is being made up. What's actually happening underneath the surface is the AI is generating what is probabilistically a totally likely set of words to be strung together given what it's seen in its training data. But AI doesn't have a sense of what a fact is. Like, these are not parts of that architecture. So it's stringing words together in a way that is probable, but what it's seen with the internet data is all sorts of stuff. So misinformation, crazy opinions, ungrounded stuff, creative writing. It's seen all of these sort of different ways to use language. So it doesn't always have the ability to differentiate between what's fact-based and completely logically reasoned versus what is something that maybe, the words work together in a way that makes sense given the training data patterns, but it's, not necessarily, it doesn't work, if that makes sense.
Clearly, large language models have improved significantly, which has unlocked many new capabilities. But there are still limitations, including those hallucinations that Savina mentioned. But exactly how detrimental are some of these limitations? And what else do companies need to consider before running full speed at these AI solutions? To tackle that, we hear from NNG user experience specialist and former computational neuroscientist, Caleb Sponheim.
It is easy to imagine the positive impact of an AI application kind of in isolation or in a vacuum. Like, it would be great if I didn't have to write all my emails, or it would be great if I didn't have to write out by hand my entire research plan or something like that. In a vacuum, great. Oh, amazing, right? No business decision is made in a vacuum, whether on an individual level or on an organization-wide level. And so when we decide, hey, we're going to use AI to accelerate our scoping process for our consulting business or something like that. This is completely hypothetical, by the way. And then it's like, okay, what's the cost associated with doing that? Large language models in particular take skill to use well and use effectively. There's a low barrier to entry in that you don't need to know a programming language beyond English to start interacting with it. But in order to approach the ceiling of performance from these models, you need to be able to write effective instructions or prompts to these models. And so there's time. There's a similar amount of time trade-off of automating something as you would as a programmer, right? The time it takes to automate something will be longer than if you just do it yourself for the first time or once or even twice or even 3 times, right? And so you have to say, oh, how long will it take for me to automate something and then maybe maintain it and fix the bugs and implement it, right? And then see the results versus can I just do it myself or can I ask someone else to do it?
Time and time again, we have to evaluate and weigh this balance between being innovative in our practice, but also being a bit more cautious and mindful of hype versus reality, which I'm sure many of you have seen the memes of like people sprinkling AI on everything, AI chat on everything. And while there are certainly going to be really great use cases, and we already see amazing use cases for AI and productivity, how much hype, or rather, how much of this do you think is hype and how much of this do you think is legitimate?
An application that jumps to mind for lots of people in terms of a consumer level benefit of AI is search. Are things like doing, in the UX world, we call it desk research, secondary research, right? I want to learn more about, let's say, contextual inquiry. Some people might encourage me to use a large language model to learn more about that method. So I might go to, let's say, Google's Gemini and say, hey, can you provide me with an explanation for what contextual inquiry is? And can you give me some sources or some links to for further reading for that, right? Now, I did this. I asked Gemini for this exact piece of information. And what I got were 5 perfectly formatted citations for white papers written by various people through various organizations, NNG included, on contextual inquiry. Great. None of them existed. They were completely hallucinated. They were comprehensible in that they looked like text strung together that I could read, but they were by authors who had never written for NNG. They were titles of white papers that didn't exist. As soon as I started to look for the source of the actual information, not just take it at its word, things start to fall apart. Anytime you ask a tool to fill out a research plan or draft an email or tell me about contextual inquiry or some other UX research method, it is incumbent upon me to check to make sure that all of that information it's giving me is correct. I have to budget that in to my use of the tool, and that's an associated cost.
Clearly, AI is not perfect, but nonetheless, the hype can often make it hard to tell whether the end is truly near for the role of the human UX professional, especially when layoffs seem to become increasingly common in our space. Will AI soon steal our jobs? Is time ticking until we become redundant? And just how vulnerable are we as UX professionals?
Stakeholders don't need a legitimate reason to fire you. They just need a reason. AI doesn't need to work in order for them to use it as a justification to get rid of you. That's the scary thing. There are too many news stories to count about companies cutting headcount. Maybe 2 years ago, it was a complaint about interest rates. A year ago, it was inflation and macroeconomic conditions generally. These days, it might be a stated bullishness about artificial intelligence. They're cutting headcount for all the same reasons. It's a expectation that the workers that are left over will be able to do the same amount of work or more than everyone who was there, right? If we look at that claim about AI specifically, and let's focus in on the UX community, it's unfounded. We talk about in the course about both design and research, and in regards to research, you can ask an AI to generate research data. You can do it. It's horrendous and bad, and you shouldn't do it. It's essentially researching all of human knowledge, not people who use your product. And you can imagine the differences in outcomes that you might get from that, right? Additionally, large language models, and this is more of a philosophical take, but I think it is true. Large language models are built and trained upon human knowledge, text, comprehensible text that has been created up until this point in time. Research is about exploring the world, the known universe, finding the edge of that known universe, staring into the unknown, the abyss ahead of us, and taking a tiny little step into the void. And that act is one that is extremely difficult, resource intensive, and unique. And I have no aspersions that AI could never do it. It can't do it now. And there's no indication that it will be able to. So that's research. In regards to design, I want to be clear, many design disciplines are being disrupted by AI right now. Many, many, many. There are AI tools that are accelerating and replacing steps and workflows for graphic designers, for people making placeholder content, stock photographers. Those disciplines are being disrupted. UX design is relatively unique in that, based on our research, the work that designers do, and UX designers specifically do, is still safe from AI. It has not made inroads in the ways that it has with other design or visual disciplines. Again, not to say it won't, but it has not. And that speaks to, in the same way, some of the very kind of unique things that UX designers do, not least of which the work that UX designers do to communicate cross-functionally around a design. The most valuable work that's done for a UX designer is not make the pretty thing, but to transform data into a visual representation, garner feedback and iterate, and then implement that. It's not just about how good the thing looks, it's about everything around it.
What really is the job of someone working in UX? Are we just our workflows? Are we just rote data processors? Or is there something more than that we're doing? And I'm full on in the camp of there's a lot more that we're doing than just qualitative data analysis or, using Figma. There's just a lot happening that's not just using the tools or not doing these workflows. So I definitely, I think that if anything, these are improved technologies that will allow us to do more work faster, which, as we all know, there's just an abundance of opportunities for where UX research and UX thinking is needed throughout the company. And so we're often really just sort of locked up inside of product because product has the most desperate need for our type of thinking. But if you collaborate with sales or customer support or marketing, there's just so many different surfaces of a company that touch the customer, but often don't get the same level of thought and analysis that we bring when we work on actual product stuff. Because, it makes sense that that's the place. If you have limited resources for UX and you have to deploy them somewhere, that absolutely makes sense. But with the ability to amplify how much work we're doing and how quickly we're doing it, I just see a future in which we're more embedded throughout the entire organization. And rather than just being sort of linked directly with product and design, we become more of the institutional knowledge keepers, so to speak, of knowing who the customer is and helping sort of design customer centricity into every aspect of these organizations that we work in, which is so much more than just product. It's also marketing. It's also, sales. It's also support, because there's so many of those interfaces throughout the whole product. So if anyone is listening in and is worried about the future of their career, things are going to change for sure. I think no one would guess otherwise at this juncture. But I think that it's really very much a bright future ahead for us about just being able to do more different types of research work and be able to help more people at our organizations.
The good news is humans are not only relevant, but necessary. Still, it's not enough to just keep doing what we've always done, because the competitive landscape is changing very quickly. I asked both Caleb and Savina, what kinds of skills should UX professionals be building in order to remain relevant in the age of AI?
You actually kind of need to think about how you're collaborating with AI as sort of a separate skill. And there's actually a name for it, which is called prompting or prompt design. Prompt engineering is another term that it goes by. All of this is sort of the art of directing the AI to get it to do what you want it to do. So instructing it to sort of angle it in a specific way, giving it feedback, and kind of how you work back and forth with AI is totally its own skill and art form. And we as a field are really, really primed to do well at this, because the art of the interview is so full of how do you direct someone else to kind of, do you lead them into these new territories and make sure that they're going in this direction and not that direction, or intentionally being sort of, open-ended so that you don't inadvertently guide them somewhere, the sort of the trade-off between artfully using the guided questions and angling versus keeping things open-ended to prevent bias. All of that stuff is completely applicable to how you work with AI, because even in those little details of the words you're using to prompt the AI, those all carry weights in how the model works in the background. So the words that you use to ask the question, statistically speaking, bias the AI. And it can be hard for folks outside of our field, I think, to really understand why that's bad, because also the sort of effects of acting against incorrect information happens so far after the decision's already made. So it's sort of downstream. People kind of forget about it, and there's sort of this not a perfect sort of connection between, okay, we made this decision because of this information, which turned out to be wrong. It can be hard to kind of make those connections. And I think that's one of the things that our field is really poised to help do, is just make sure that good decisions are being made, and that how we leverage past information and is brought back into the current context of, maybe this was interviews conducted before COVID. Post-COVID world is totally different now. And so a lot of the things that people said in those interviews can't actually be applied to this particular new context where we're looking at something new. So those sorts of skills, and be able to contextualize data and making sure that it's actually being used and leveraged in a way that's going to support humans' real needs, and then also, but also be sort of faithful to the truth of the situation. There's such an art to that, and I think we are just going to be more relevant in the future, being able to manage that process.
The way that we react to AI is not so different from any other tool or disruption. I want to emphasize this as much as I can, that the instincts that we have about how to demonstrate value and contribute to organizations and clearly show impact and contribute to impact, it's the same in the world of AI too, right? It's a new set of tools that can be applied in particular ways. But if you weren't, if you weren't able to evaluate what matters in the business and shape your behavior and the type of work you do to align with that before AI, your job was maybe tenuous before AI as it is now, right? I'm not saying the risk hasn't increased, but we have a bank of knowledge about how to do good work and how to communicate the impact of that work. It's difficult in UX, but we have a lot of knowledge about how to do that. You don't have to throw that knowledge out the window when it comes to AI. It's all within the same context. In some ways, that's a vote of confidence to us, that you don't have to reinvent the wheel. The wheel's still on the cart. It's maybe just there's a different horse at the front or something. You're holding a different carrot. I don't know, something.
Yeah. It now has all-weather tires, right?
There you go.
Whether we like it or not, AI is certainly here to stay, and it can be a useful tool to increase our productivity and keep ourselves from getting left behind. In fact, that core need to improve research quality and speed is exactly why Savina started her company, Altis. You've been doing a lot of really cool things with Altis. Can you tell us a little bit about that and what kind of prompted all this exploration for you?
Yes. So necessity is the mother of all invention, and sometimes prototyping your own solutions, you end up with something really interesting. So Altis is one of those. Altis, I basically, way back when I was at Eventbrite, there was just this need for Eventbrite customers to figure out how to survive COVID because, Eventbrite is all about in-person events. And when COVID hit, that completely collapsed a lot of small businesses and how they were able to stay afloat. So I was just really passionate about helping these small businesses survive. And so I needed to figure out a way to scale the work that I was doing and interview more people and be able to turn around insights faster. And that really became this path of prototyping that ended up leading to the question of whether or not AI actually might be able to automate full chunks of our work. So, for example, the qualitative analysis process after doing the interviews and sort of short-circuiting that process that we normally do, which is very, very manual and very detail-oriented, seeing if you could just offload it entirely to the AI. And the answer ends up being yes. The AI actually can do stuff that we would normally think only humans are able to do, but the technology these days is really fantastic. So obviously with our system, we wanted it to be a serious research tool. And so for it to be a serious research tool, it has to be willing to teach you things that maybe you are totally in the opposite camp about it, but the facts say this other thing. So it needs to be able to substantiate its perspective and then also articulate why this particular perspective might make more sense than something else. So all of this has been built into the architecture of our system. So just some examples of ways in which we've brought this to life is so normal AI systems don't really know the difference between a verbatim quote or an inference. Everything, it's doing is in fact, it's an inference engine. So it doesn't really know the difference between a verbatim piece of fact and something that's an inference because everything it's doing is inference effectively. So one thing that we built in is that when it's reasoning using pieces of data, it actually knows the difference between a verbatim quote and something that could be inferred based on something someone said. And this is, of course, really important because we naturally, when humans are interpreting discourse, we know how to make that distinction. We know the difference between someone said this explicitly versus they said this, therefore it can be inferred that X, Y, Z. But this is not sort of a logical thinking that's going on in the background of large language models. It's really just sort of connecting strings of, probabilistically relevant content. It's producing content rather than producing knowledge or producing information. So our system is very much designed to work within that sort of, we're trying to produce knowledge, we're trying to produce information that's actually useful, relevant. And of course, with anything qualitative, there's always many interpretations that are possible. And we've even built that into the system as well, where it explores several different interpretations and actually decides on which one is the most plausible one and either represents many to you and shows you the different options for how you could interpret something, or shows you the sort of most coherent interpretation that's available. And it's sort of these sort of ways of thinking that are not out of the box for AI whatsoever, but are very much intrinsic to how we're approaching solving a lot of these problems. By the time folks are listening to this, we will have opened up new space for design partners. So anyone can actually go to the Altis website, sign up, learn how to use it, get a demo, and actually start to use it immediately. So some of the kind of easy use cases to think about is just right now it's very much optimized for analyzing conversations, but any kind of conversation data. So it's very broadly usable. It's also really only designed for folks who already have a background in research and kind of know what they're doing regarding the research workflow. It's almost like getting your own sort of specialized research assistant so that you can just do your work faster and more effortlessly than you would before. So for me, one of the things I love about using it in actual research work is you can delegate out the sort of like rigorous the rigorous coding process for all of the interviews, and then be able to sort of integrate the information the way that you want to and do the storytelling at the end. The other thing I've liked about it too is a lot of the customers who've actually been helping us, prototype it and have been using it with their actual jobs. Often the AI is going to teach you at least one or two things that you did not see when you were looking at the data, and that's just by virtue of when two humans look at the same data set. They're always going to have slightly different approaches. No one will always see the exact same thing, and the AI is sort of many people in one, in the sense that it's always approaching things with a new perspective, because it doesn't have sort of specific memory in the way that humans do, where everything's all, you can't change that you were the same person who read the other 3 interviews. So you are, by the fact that you read the other 2 first, has now biased how you're going to intake the sort of coding process for the next couple of interviews that you're reading, versus the AI actually doesn't have that, where it's every time it's looking at data, the way the system is designed, it's sort of starting from scratch. So it's because of that, it lacks biases that we have. Of course, it also has unfortunate biases. So, the human can't be removed from this process because the AI is going to be biased in negative ways as well. But its sort of beginner mind of how it approaches everything leads to sort of new and novel connections that are going to be different than the ones that you naturally came to. And sort of organizing those things together of like, what are the unique insights that you as the human doing this project came up with, and integrating it with the new perspectives that you can get from working with AI, it can unlock a lot. Obviously, as a part of designing the system, there's always opportunities to test it while doing research for other projects. And some of the things that it's unlocked for me is day over day iteration cycles with design, where you could have, during a design sprint, you run interviews on one day, and then before the next morning, Altis overnight analyzes all the findings and delivers the results so the team can review them going into the next day of the design sprint. So that's sort of like rapid iteration cycles. It's just going to 10x how much we can do in these design sprints, and be able to work with teammates more quickly and sort of more in a more agile way. All of that I find so exciting. One of the most, I think, humbling things about it too is often when it does its output, it very frequently comes up with something that's better than what I personally was going to write, which is, humbling, but also really exciting, because it just shows you it is so much better when it's working with you, and then you are so much better when you're leveraging what it's good at. So human memory has such intense limitations. There's no person who never gets tired, like never forgets things. These are just parts of being human that make us, or is just part of the design of how we work as beings. Versus the AI, it will sit there and analyze crazy amounts of data, and the last data point it's reading, it has the same sort of, a level of attention as it did with the first point. So it never gets tired. It's not, it's able to make connections in a way that's almost the exact opposite of how we're able to function. So human intuition and bringing together kind of like the dots and all of that stuff works really well with AI's ability to also bring together the pieces and kind of analyze at scale. So I think we're definitely complementary systems and work better together more than anything else.
That was Savina Hawkins, co-founder of Altis. Now, companies like Altis are leading the way in changing the landscape of UX work. And regardless if you're doing research or design, there's a ton of opportunity to use these tools wisely and effectively. But if you're unsure where to start, Caleb has a few suggestions on how to stay informed about what's new in AI.
What I would recommend is engaging with the core large language model experience in small ways. Fortunately, because many leading AI companies are either running on vast venture capital backed budgets or they are being run by monopoly-sized tech companies, the most advanced large language model products are available for free. And so what I would recommend is when you're doing a task that feels as though it maybe could be made a little bit easier. And whenever it's a writing task, that's a very easy thing to try. If it's any sort of quantitative analysis or even qualitative analysis, I would argue that it is worth the extra time and effort to just see what an AI does with it. See what an AI tool does with it. It probably, and the reason you're doing this is not to get extra efficiency out of it, but to kind of check in to see how these tools are doing. Check in to see like, oh, could I integrate it into my work or is it not ready yet? Right? You can easily subscribe to too many daily newsletters, email newsletters, and be inundated and overwhelmed. That's my job. That's not y'all's job. So what I would recommend is subscribing to 3 sources of kind of weekly information. So like one of them would be just kind of the newsletter equivalent of a newspaper, right? There's a bunch out there, but any sort of weekly update on the state of the AI industry, just to kind of keep up with what's happening. Nothing happens day to day that is so important that you need to know about it. Weekly is fine. You could even go monthly if you really wanted to, and you're not going to miss much, especially when it comes to actual applications to our work. And
That's
then
super reassuring.
No, I fully believe that. Print it, record it, whatever. I do not think the AI industry moves so fast that you need to be on top of it daily or even weekly. Additionally, I'd recommend subscribing to a optimistic perspective on AI and a skeptical perspective on AI. There's a lot of writers out there, and what optimistic and skeptical means to you will be different. But there are plenty of writers out there that are messing with AI daily and trying different things and testing out new things and kind of really pushing to see, all right, what's the ceiling on what we can do and what we can build and how we can make our work better. And then there's a just as important, if not more important, group of writers that are delivering informed critiques of the technology, of the industry, of the communication, and of the cost and risks associated with AI. And I maintain that it is important to be exposed to both sides of both of those perspectives at the very least. And if you have those 3, that weekly news, a optimistic and a skeptical perspective, you're good. You're golden.
That was Caleb Sponheim, UX specialist at Nielsen Norman Group. We've included Caleb's favorite sources of AI information in the show notes, but if you want to do an even deeper dive into how to use AI tools effectively for UX work, Caleb is currently teaching a full-day course with Nielsen Norman Group called Practical AI for UX Professionals. More information about that course can be found on our website, along with many free articles and videos on UX and AI. But to close, if I were to summarize the chats that I had with Caleb and Savina into a single takeaway, it would probably be this. AI is still evolving rapidly and carries immense amounts of risk. Every person working in this space won't hesitate to tell you that there are a lot of issues still left to resolve. However, using these tools as thought partners with a healthy dose of skepticism for the outputs, that's a strategy that will help you manage risk and create better solutions for your teams. Thank you again to Caleb Sponheim and Savina Hawkins for their thoughts and for their willingness to share with our community. This episode was hosted by me, Therese Fessenden, and produced by the incredibly talented Chrissy Richardson. For even more free UX content, including articles and videos, or for information about our upcoming courses, check out www.nngroup.com. And if you like this show, please leave a rating and subscribe or follow on your platform of choice. That's it for today's show. Until next time, remember, keep it simple.